So we are just hanging out at the beach, having some fun with shooting with the amazing Tamron 70-180. Appreciate you guys hitting like, and we're gonna shoot some more and then head back to the studio and take a closer look at Tamron's newest lens. All right, so now we're back in the studio. It's been a few hours that we got sandblasted out there, so let's talk about the build quality of this lens. I have been using Tamron's 17-180. I also have their 28-75, which a friend is borrowing real quickly, but I do have a lot of experience with this line of lenses right here. Now this one especially has held up really well. The big difference between this and the 70-200 Sonys out there is that this one is going to telescope out. That will save you a little bit of room in your bag. It also means that there's kind of this area right here for dust, moisture, sand, anything to get in there and really ruin your lens. Thankfully, this thing has 8 seals all over it, so it's held up remarkably well. I mean, I didn't dunk it in the sand, but we use and abuse our lenses, so this has held up really well. No grinding or anything like that, despite getting really sandy out there. The other thing you will notice is that there's really no switches or dials, and no custom focus buttons or custom function buttons on this one. Not even an AF manual focus switch on there. Some of Tamron's nicer lenses have like these autofocus windows, so really just sticking with the basics on this. Now, one thing you might have noticed is that there's also no switch for image stabilization, and that's because it's not in this lens while a lot of other longer lenses have it. And the big reason for that is if you're hand holding this lens at 180 millimeters, your hands will shake, especially mine, and you will make it a little bit more difficult to actually compose a shot with that. Also, you'd be more likely to get motion blur out of it, but if you're shooting at faster shutter speeds, which honestly I'm usually doing at these longer focal lengths, that won't be too much of an issue for you on that one. For me, if you're using one of Sony's older cameras without IBIS, that might be a little bit of an issue for you. However, using IBIS in the A7 III, I had no issues hand holding this lens. It locked on. I was even able to get some really slow shutter speeds on this, and I have crazy coffee-infused hands that shake like crazy. So if I can do it, you can pull this one off. So yeah, overall, it might be a little bit of a miss if you're using Sony's older cameras, but A7 IIIs, A7R IIIs and above, and Sony's image stabilization technology is just going to get better on that one. You're going to have no issues hand holding this lens with the IBIS built in. We were actually really impressed with the image quality on this lens too. So Sally did a lot of photos with this out at the beach. Her images look really sharp. I shot tons of video with this as well. I also took it to a wedding, captured pretty much all of our images here at f2.8, and we were also using the Sony A7R IV, which will push the limits of any lens with 65 megapixels on there. So if it looks good on this camera, it will look amazing on an A7 III. Also, I love shooting weddings with f2.8s because if you're trying to blur out that background more, it's going to help with that. It's also going to help with these dark ceremony locations. So really great lens for that. And overall, the image quality on here is amazing. The only things that I noticed were that vignetting can be a little strong at f2.8. I like some natural vignetting, but this was maybe even a tad much for me. Gets really natural at f4, so just kind of keep that in mind. Also, the bokeh of this lens, it's a tad on the busy side. Again, it's something we usually see for these kind of zoom lenses on here. And overall, it was among the best I've used, but just slightly worse than like a 7200 f2.8 G Master lens from Sony. So overall, incredible image quality here all the way around. So obviously none of that matters if a lens is not focusing really well, and thankfully Tamron did not reuse old technology that worked for some of their other lenses, but not really for this. Instead, they reinvented the focus system and went with linear motors. This is something that we've seen Sony do in their recent high-end lenses, and it is thankfully here as well. And what that means is that we had absolutely no issues with everything we threw at this. Eye autofocus is going to work amazingly well. You have animal eye autofocus as well. This is not like using a Tamron lens with an adapter from other cameras. If you've been using that, this is nothing like that. This is just like using a native lens. And so whether it was action style that we were throwing at it or using it for portraits, we shot a lot of portraits with this. This lens performed really great for autofocusing with virtually everything that we threw at it. Now, one thing that I usually don't say on a lens is that there's actually a hidden feature on this lens. So one of the big advantages here is that this lens will close focus way more than your traditional 70-200. So 1 to 4.6, I believe, is the factor on there for magnification, and that is way more than you would get on like a Sony 70-200, especially their F4 series, which is horrible in this. But the Sony does, or the Tamron does have another feature on it. Throw that into manual focus, and you can actually get on full macro really close to your subjects on that. Now, keep in mind that this is kind of stretching the image around, and so if you do this with the manual focus getting even closer, you will notice that you're going to get a lot more blur on the outside, but it does produce some really cool results. And again, even with the normal macro abilities or close focusing abilities, this lens will outperform virtually every other 70-200 on the market. Now, when I first got this lens in, I did a little poll on IG. If you guys aren't following me there, go check it out. I'm posting like BTS of everything that we're doing out there. And I did ask you about this lens if you had any questions on it. A lot of you asked about focus breathing. So if you're shooting photos, what you're going to see is you shoot with a 180mm lens. You kind of expect to get that 180mm lens, but you'll find as the subject gets closer or far away from you, that might shift, and your image is really going to be looking more like 150mm if you have a lens that has a lot of focus breathing. Thankfully, I tested this against Sony 70-200s as well, and really minimal on this one, so you seem to be getting the true focal length on this. And for video as well, when a subject is approaching you, you can start to see that background shift. It looks really ugly and very minimal on this one. You guys also asked about flare, and I did some test shots with this. Seems really well controlled, no ghosting, artifacting, or anything like that. And then the other big question from you guys was teleconverters, and this is the negative here. This will not work with any of Sony's teleconverters, and right now Tamron has no plans for creating one specifically for this lens or this camera series. So this is actually Tamron's third lens in this lineup of f2.8 zooms, and I've been using, again, 17-28 here, the 28-75. Since they first came out, I've got reviews for all of these lenses. And these are really a stunning setup for Sony's cameras, especially the A7III. I find it so much easier to recommend these cameras because of these lens combinations. Because if you think about it, Sony's cameras are all about this kind of smaller size advantage and sticking these more compact lenses in it, but not sacrificing that wide aperture, great image quality overall, and then having a lens that costs a lot less. So $1,200 for this one versus up to $2,600 for an f2.8 zoom with Sony's lenses really seems to hit the spot, especially for the A7III series of cameras even more. In fact, if you're a wedding or event shooter, especially again with that A7III, you absolutely cannot go wrong with this setup. You're going to have the great image quality that you should expect and need from your gear with that wide aperture, and you're going to do it with a lens that is still very compact and again fits that price tag of these A7III cameras even a little bit better. Now, if you guys own an A7 III or the R4, I do have a help guide that walks you through every setting in the menu, how to use it, what it does, all kinds of stuff like that. I'll also leave a coupon code for that in the description below if you want to check those out. And then I'll be hitting up questions for you guys, so feel free to ask me anything. Say hi on social media or in the description below. Love to hear what you guys are doing or up to lately. Hope you guys are doing well. I'll see you soon in a new video.